Hello and welcome to the World Wanderers podcast, your source for travel stories, travel destinations, and travel philosophy.
I'm Amanda.
I'm Ryan.
And we're your hosts.
Hello everyone and welcome back to the World Wanderers podcast. Today we're excited to be sharing a conversation we had with Bob DiMenna from the Traveler's Blueprint podcast. We're talking all about planning trips today. So Bob has had a ton of travel experience, but he approaches it in a way that's a little bit different from Amanda and I. He is working full time and has limited vacation time every year, and so he wants to make the most of that experience. So he really focuses in on the detail and the planning that goes into his trips. And for Amanda and I, where we're living a more nomadic lifestyle, finding a new place to be, spending lots of time there, and kind of using that place we are as a hub and being a little bit more spontaneous in general with travel, we really enjoyed chatting with Bob about his perspective and really getting into some of the nitty gritty about how planning can really add a lot of value to your trip, and even the planning process can be such a valuable, interesting experience. Obviously, right now, it's a weird time to be someone who loves travel. I don't know, but if you're like us, you're kind of at a loss where you're thinking, normally you'd be thinking about, oh, what do I want to do later this year? Where do I want to go next year? And you're kind of on hold right now. And so we know you're probably not planning a trip, but like us, you're probably imagining places you could go in the future when we get back to traveling. And so we wanted to share this interview with you now as a way to think about that and to think about future plans, even though we might not be able to lock them in right now. We also talk with Bob a little bit about kind of the current situation and what it's like, kind of where he's at in New Jersey. We recorded this interview a little over a month ago. So for anyone listening, if you catch anything that comes up in that regard. And one quick note before we get started, and that is we recently put out a new episode on the World Wanderers Insider chatting all about finances. So one of the things we talk about a lot as nomads is how to find ways to work abroad or to work online so you can go anywhere. But another part of it is finding ways to travel affordably and to save money to really increase your options when it comes to travel. So really dive deep into finances and saving money and budgeting and the importance of it all on our most recent episode over there. So to get access to that, you can go to patreon.com/theworldwanderers and find out all about it and get access to the World Wanderers Insider podcast. All right, on to the interview with Bob.
Welcome to the podcast today, Bob. We're super excited to have you here with us.
Thank you for having me on.
Yeah, absolutely. We're stoked for this conversation. There's going to be so much good learning coming out of this. But before we get there, where are you joining us from today?
So I am in New Jersey. I'm about 20 minutes outside of Philadelphia. So for those familiar with the East Coast, New Jersey sort of separates itself by which city you live outside of. The northern part of the state all kind of associate with New York City, and the southern part of the state really associate with Philadelphia. I'm sure there's people in New Jersey that are going to hear that and say, I don't associate with either. But that's kind of the gist of it. Yeah, they're two major urban hubs that occupy either side, both north and south of New Jersey.
Yeah, I'm sure we've offended the New Jersey audience of our show many times before. So,
I have to admit, my heart is sort of with Philadelphia more so than New Jersey, even though I am a resident of New Jersey. That's kind of, the city that I identify with. I'm more of like an urban guy. I like the city. I like being in the city. I like the restaurants, and I'm not so much a country guy. And so, yeah, there's a lot to do in New Jersey as well. I'm not undermining New Jersey. I love it here. Beautiful beaches and stuff. But that's kind of to give a good, explanation of where I am. That kind of fits, I think.
Yeah, and so it's a bit of a weird time to be a travel content creator or to be in the travel industry. So I wanted to ask kind of what's life been like kind of on your end over this past couple months?
It's slowed down, that's for sure. I've had trips canceled. My podcasting partner, his trips were all canceled as well, obviously. My trip is even in September. And I had flights booked out to Italy that were canceled by American Airlines. And although things are opening up, and I do have friends in Italy that are sending me pictures and information saying that Italy has jumped back into the swing of things, I don't think I'm going to rebook this year. I think I'm going to hold off because I'm not sure I want to travel and be confined to social distancing and wearing masks and potentially having to deal with closures and people who are on edge and the anxiety that this is now caused in the travel world. So that's kind of where I am with my personal travels. I'm shying away from it. I think I'm going to take a break for the year 2020, hopefully revisit it in 2021. As far as the podcast goes, we kind of hit a snag with, people aren't creating content. We interview adventurers. That's kind of our bread and butter. We like adventurers, and we like people who do these crazy things, and then get people on who write blogs and are travel authors. But if their content is slowing down, then that causes our content to slow down. And a lot of the people that we were reaching out to were so focused on recovering or trying to find new avenues for their content that they didn't have time to come on our podcast. And even if they did, they wouldn't really have anything to talk about other than how coronavirus has impacted their livelihood. So, of course, it's impacted us. But we're fortunate enough, my partner and I, that we don't do this. We don't travel podcast full time. It's more of a side hustle for us. So we both have jobs and families and mortgages. We're very much kind of stuck. It's kind of been a whirlwind, to be honest. But yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's kind of weird. It's like, I feel like a bit hard to think about with those future plans, right? Because you're thinking, okay, like things are probably going to be better by then, but you got to account for what if there's more closures that happen, like if a second wave, as people like to talk about, starts to happen, and like the US starts canceling flights from other places and you get stuck other places, or even the kind of attitudes around tourism. That's something that we've kind of thought about as well. Like, hey, some of these places you can probably, as nomads, it's like, well, maybe it'd be a great time to go to like Northern Italy or Spain. Feels like a bit weird to say that, but like not right now, but like, soon, because there's opportunities. That's one of the busiest, most heavily trafficked touristic places in the world. So it's got a lot of capacity. And if there's no one there, there's probably a lot of like opportunity to see that area, which honestly, for like the average kind of lower budget nomad, a lot of that area of Europe became unaffordable. But then you also have to wonder about, like, what are people there? How are their attitudes towards tourists coming there at these times when it's like they're so focused on health and safety and all of that?
That's a huge part of it. That's something that I've been considering too. Even moving away from Italy, and my wife and I are now discussing, okay, let's just travel domestically. Let's stay in the United States. And there are plenty of options. The good thing about living in the United States is that you have all these different states, and they're all so different. They all have new things to offer and new cultures and new restaurants. So we can find something to do domestically, which is something that we overlooked because we enjoy traveling to Europe and, around the world so much. And so we're eyeing up different locations, and there are all these mountain towns in the northeastern United States, in Maine and Vermont and New Hampshire. They're beautiful little mountain towns. And now I'm looking at it, and it sounds great for us, but how welcoming are these people going to be who maybe live in these tiny towns, 50,000 people or something like that? And here we have people from New Jersey, the second most impacted state in the entire country from coronavirus, showing up on their doorstep in their tiny little mountain town, where New Jersey is the most densely populated state in the entire country, and I can't imagine they would be that welcoming. I really don't know. I don't want to speak for them, but some people won't, for sure. And I don't know how that's going to play out for international travel. If you have countries that did a great job of handling this, or were small enough to where it was more manageable, why would they want the epicenter of the virus, Americans just flooding in off of cruise ships? There is going to be some sort of attitude towards that, and I don't think everybody's going to be as welcoming as we think they will be, or as they were in the past.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we live in like a little tourist mountain town in Western Canada, and there's definitely, I think, mixed opinions that are going around. And there's not a lot of hospital capacity here if there was to be, massive outbreaks and have people from all over the world, which at this time of year, there normally would be tons of tourists, and it's very, very quiet right now. So it's interesting to think about. I was talking with my Spanish language teacher who lives outside of Mexico City, and he was saying that because Mexico has been... the president has very much said, like, we'll just keep things open. And then the states have separately, like, closed down as they saw fit and stuff like that. And so there's lots of, like, little tiny pueblos that are encouraged to have people go and visit, but these pueblos are like, we don't have doctors or hospitals, like don't come if you have the virus. And I think there definitely is a responsibility as a traveler and a tourist to consider how your actions impact other people. And of course, we always have that as travelers, but I think we really need to be considerate, especially as like young, healthy people. Like if I'm a carrier of the virus, I could get somebody sick and not even know the consequences of those actions. Like, is it worth it for me to go travel Mexico or, somewhere else just because I want to travel right now?
That's a huge point that most of the travelers in our little travel community that, that we speak of is they're mostly younger people who can hit the road and can be asymptomatic carriers, and then are traveling to countries like Italy, which is like has this enormous elderly population where they're all living on top of one another. I don't know. I mean, I don't like to tell people what to do, and I know travel is it is very important to the people that I associate with. Me personally, I'm willing to take the break when I'm capable to do it, and I can't speak on everybody. And I know some people need to do it for their livelihoods, and so they will. But it's so hard to talk about because you always, when you discuss things like this, you want like a black and white answer. You want yes and no, but there's so many contributing factors, and it's all gray,
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. It's so hard to pin it onto one thing and say that this is the best way to go about this into the future, when everything you do, no matter what you do, seems to have negative repercussions.
For sure. And we're definitely 100% feel like people need to make the decisions that are best for them. And if that means starting to travel for whatever reason, I think you need to make that decision for you. But yeah, thanks for indulging us with a little Corona talk before we dive into our main topic. So one thing I'm curious about is just kind of how you fell in love with travel, and specifically related to like creating these detailed itineraries. Like what was it that kind of got you excited about like creating and planning a trip?
Sure. So I mean, I fell in love with travel as a kid. I don't know, just years of National Geographic and Discovery Channel. But as I graduated college and got a career in environmental science, I had to travel the country, and I was forced to travel the country to look at various properties and determine whether or not they were contaminated with petroleum products, chemical releases, whatever it may be. And so I was being sent throughout the nation on a very regular basis, at least every 2 weeks or so. And I was traveling to these cities or areas near national parks. And I realized if I can get my work done, I had all this free time. My company sent me across the country to California. They didn't expect me to do my work and get on a flight and fly home. They were completely okay with me taking it easy or not getting burned out. I mean, that's really what it was. They didn't want me to get burned out to the point that I couldn't work efficiently. So I ended up having time there. And instead of sitting in the hotel, I tried to formulate a plan. Okay, if I work this many hours, I have this many hours left to see the city or to hike in a national park or to explore. And I ended up, before I would go, creating these detailed itineraries down to the hour, down to 15 minutes sometimes, where I'd plan out everything I could possibly do. And I'd have an idea on the time and the drive and how long everything takes. And I would just cram it in because I knew I was traveling for free. So I crammed everything I possibly could in. And over the years, my itineraries just got more specific and more efficient. And that's kind of how it evolved into my personal life. And then I married a woman who loved it, which was perfect. Not everybody does. As a travel podcaster, I've talked to a million travelers, and this is not everybody's preferred travel method by any means. But she really enjoys it, and it works for us. And so now we've just taken it to the next step where we've planned multi-country trips where we have things planned out every single day. And we just maximize our time. That's really kind of the main goal, the mission of these itineraries, is to just make sure that we know what there is to see, and we figure out a way to see everything that we want to do, and it removes spontaneity completely. So if you're listening to this and you're the type you're a spontaneous traveler.
There's 24 minutes built in for spontaneity on Tuesday at 4 p.m.
So, because I've talked to people about this, and they immediately tell me, like, you're crazy. You're missing out on the meaning of travel. You're missing out on what it means to be a traveler. And I understand that. I get it. And their side, that aspect or that way to travel is very appealing to me. But I don't think I'm missing anything. I think it's the exact opposite. Yeah. So
Yeah.
that's go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, it's interesting. I think one of the things you probably have realized this as well by being a travel podcaster is that people, I think, interact with travel in an interesting way, like in ways that not necessarily a bad way, but people, it's almost like a religion in certain aspects. Like people have their way of doing it. And it's like, oh, like you're a Protestant, not a Catholic. Like, oh, we're going to like put you on that stake and we're going to burn you down if you're not doing travel their way. But like travel at the end of the day is like just a way about enjoying life. Like we're alive. We've got this opportunity to do something we love. And it's about doing the way that makes us happy, that makes us feel alive, that makes us feel like enriched, so we can go back and, you know, work on the other parts of our lives. But people very much have that sense sometimes of like, oh, you're not doing this like one thing that is the right way to travel. Like you're wrong.
Right. And those are the only people that are wrong. The people that make that claim, that say that it's that human tribalism. You know, it's my team, your team, my team's better than your team. And you fight to the death about it. But it's like, you know, the vegans and the meat eaters will battle forever. And so it's just, but yeah, it's definitely not for everybody. And it is something that I've created, you know, that has taken me a long time to really get to the point that it's incredibly efficient. But yeah, I don't know. Again, it really works for me. And I think if you're listening to this and you're the type of traveler who, number one, is limited on time. Americans are very limited on vacation time. We typically, I think on average, it's like 2 weeks total per year. And I don't know if it's similar in Canada or what, but
we're like
that causes
3 weeks.
3 weeks is like the average.
Yeah, I think there are a few more rules about like mandatory vacation time, but it's not like Europe or some places where they've got like 70 million weeks mandated. But
Australia, yeah.
Yeah. But here, there tends to just culturally as well be like, oh yeah, like legally you get 2 weeks of vacation time, but like most people working get more than that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, yeah. The United States is a weird thing against. For some reason in American culture, it's like, you know, you don't take your vacation time, just work, die. You know, that's the American way.
Yeah, like you have a baby, like 3 weeks later, you're back at work.
2 for the father. Yeah. It's like it goes by state by state. But some states don't give you anything if you're the father. Pennsylvania, yeah, I don't know. Yeah, no, but it's hard to get time off. Is the point. And so that's, I think, what this type of travel is best suited for, are those with limited time and that want to make sure they maximize their time on the ground. And there are a ton of different ways you can do that, from the, you know, flights to figuring out what restaurants to eat at to navigating the city or the destination that you're actually in, understanding the transit system. There are a lot of different ways to compile an itinerary and plan it over time.
Yeah, no, I love this conversation because, you know, for us, our kind of evolution of travel was we started as backpackers, and we definitely planned some stuff in advance, but it was very much like, for the most part, unless there was something we were, you know, event we were going for or a tour we were taking, you know, we very much just figured out what we were going to do once we got there. We stayed in hostels mostly, and they had, you know, tours that they offered and events going on. So we would just do the stuff that was kind of available there. But I do remember a very poor planning on my part was maybe Ryan's part, but I was responsible for planning. So I'll take that one. We were in Northern Ireland, and we were traveling south into Dublin and Cork area. And I was like, oh, we should really see Giant's Causeway. Like, that would be pretty cool. So I figured, oh, we'll see it from Dublin. And then I start looking, and I'm like, oh, it's like up by Belfast. Like, my bad. And it was like way too far. We could have done it in a day, but we would have spent like, you know, 8 hours of the day in a car essentially. And when we talked it through, Ryan's like, I think it's just a miss. Like, we just have to let it go. And fortunately, I've been able to go back to Europe since that trip. And I went over to Belfast and went to Giant's Causeway, and it was amazing. But for me, that was a reminder of like, oh, you really have to do your research around these things, or or you just might not get to see the thing to see in that area. And similarly, when we were in Edinburgh, I think it was, we booked really last minute. Like we just booked our hostel a couple days before, and it ended up that there was some sort of like music festival or something in town. There was pretty much nothing affordable available. We ended up staying in this like really quirky hostel that was an old church that had been converted into a hostel, which sounds really cool in theory, but churches are meant to like resonate sound. And they weren't able to soundproof it. So it was like super, super noisy and, just not like the best quality place. It was cool. But that was another thing where we're like, oh, if we want to stay at certain places, we need to book in advance. And, since then we have transitioned into this more nomadic lifestyle where we usually live in a place and then we have a lot of time. When you are in a place for, 6 months, you have quite a bit of time to explore the things that there are to see there. And so I think we're not really set up in terms of like this itinerary planning. So I would love to, and so many people like they need this, they have 2-3 weeks off for a trip and there's key things they want to see and they want to make sure that they see these things without burning out. They want to go to the restaurants that are important to them. And so I'm curious, like, where do you start planning when you pick a destination? How do you even start with this whole planning thing?
Typically, I start by picking a destination. And I know there's some travelers who kind of wait for the cheapest flight and they just grab it and go. No, that's not how I do it. I end up deciding on a destination with my wife, and we immediately go to flights. That's the first thing we go to. And I use Google Flights. I don't know. Are you familiar with the Google Flights platform?
Yeah. We typically use Skyscanner, but again, they have a similar functionality. I just find that Skyscanner sometimes is like, you can trust the prices, where sometimes Google Flights are like, find a price and then click through and it's not there anymore. Maybe that's a Canadian issue too.
Maybe. Yeah. So I've had this exact conversation with nomadic travelers like yourself who are always surprised to find out how efficient Google Flights can be. Skyscanner seems to be the go-to for travelers like yourself. And it is a pretty good platform, but Google Flights has a lot of options on there where you can actually track your flights just as you can in Skyscanner, but you can also use this bar graph tool. So when you actually go to the Google Flights platform, there is a graph option and you can actually scroll through in a bar graph for several months and see how the prices go up and down over time and get an idea of when your flight is going to be cheapest. It's incredibly easy to use, and I've used it so many times for booking flights. There are also options on Google Flights that allow you to, if you aren't sure about a destination, but you have a time picked, you can schedule, or you can put in your departing destination and then decide on a time frame that you want to travel, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 6 weeks, whatever it may be, and then zoom back out on Google Maps to the point that you can see the entire planet and just scroll around. And as you scroll around, little bubbles will pop up with prices to those destinations. And you'd be surprised how cheap certain tickets are for certain times of the year that you would have otherwise never known existed. So, but I do use Google Flights and I do use the bar graph a lot for tracking my prices. And I end up, I don't know if you guys ever used Scott's Cheap Flights at all.
Yeah.
Are you familiar with that?
We haven't used it, but I have been on his mailing list, and I actually had to unsubscribe because it was like giving me travel FOMO. Even like while I was traveling, I'm like, oh, but I could be in Japan, not Panama.
Right. Yeah.
But he's got awesome deals. Like if you're looking to plan, I feel like it's such an amazing resource.
So all those people do, he just pays people to scour Google Flights and platforms like that. So if you have the time to do it, that's like rule number one for itinerary planning is having time. You need to actually physically be able to spend time researching your destination and researching everything and sitting on a computer. It does take a decent amount of time. But if you have the time to scour Google Flights on every single day, you jump on the computer, you can find the deals. They come up and they sometimes last hours or they'll last a day or two and then they're gone. But that's really the best way. And I found flight deals similar to what Scott's Cheap Flights gets all the time and sends emails for. I just do it on my own, sitting on my own computer. So that's, once I get the flight established, another incredible option that Google offers is called Google Explore. So when you're in the Google Flights tab, on the left-hand side will be this Explore option. And if you click this, it actually will provide you with a ton of information on the destination. It will give you historical information. It will give you multiple itineraries depending on how long the trip you're going to be on. You can have multi-day itineraries with some of the largest attractions at your destination, which then will correspond with a Google map, identifying each location on the map that will allow you to easily navigate. So you can say, hey, from here I go here, and this way, you don't miss anything when you're in Ireland by, it being too far north.
You don't miss the thing to see in Northern Ireland.
It's such an incredible tool. I'm a big map guy, and I can learn. I can look at a map and I can understand a city very quickly. And so it's great for me. I'm sure there are other people out there too that can look at an aerial photograph or maybe a map of the city on Google Maps. And once you understand the lay of the land, it's much easier to navigate. And again, the more time you spend looking at Venice in an aerial photograph or in Google Maps, once you're actually zoned in and you're standing at a certain location, you'll know where to go. It comes back to you. So those two tools, Google Flights followed by Google Explorer, I think are the first way, or the way I get into my itinerary building.
Yeah, I love those tips. And Ryan pulled up Google Explorer while you were talking. So we're definitely going to be using that going forwards, just because I was thinking about how there's another example of a miss we had, and it was the glowworm caves in New Zealand. And it was the same thing where I thought we could access it from a different point, and then we went too far. And when you're on a tight schedule, which, we have been in these cases, it wasn't like, oh, we can just backtrack. Like, we've got the next destination to get to. You just kind of have to take those things as a miss if you go too far from them, because you can't spend 3 days on one activity. I guess you could for sure, but for most of us, we're just like, oh, I screwed up, so I just won't see that this time. I'll see it next time.
Right. Yeah. I mean, my partner Elliot, who I do the podcast with, he is not a planner at all, and he's told me about multiple times where he'll wake up in the morning in his Airbnb or wherever he was sleeping, and as he's eating breakfast, they're figuring out what to do. And sometimes that takes a decent amount of time. You get lazy, you end up sitting on the couch on your phone, you get distracted, and you end up doing anything for several hours. When if you already had it planned out, you get ready and you go. You already know what to do. You're already set on a track. And what this planning does is it makes the actual thought process seamless. It removes the wondering, what do I do? That's gone. You just do. And you enjoy.
Yeah. And so once you have kind of a sense for the options, how do you kind of go through the process of, especially with your, knowing what your wife likes, doesn't like, how do you decide what you want to do and where you're going to schedule it all?
So this is how I sort of broke down. I mean, the Italy trip that I had planned recently is fresh in my head. So, after I booked the flights, and I booked a flight into Venice, and then I booked a flight out of Rome. And so I had an idea. I already know the geography of Italy in my head. But so you pick each city, and then you decide on how long you're going to stay in each city. We had 16 days, so it was 2 days in Venice, 3 days in Florence, a day or two in Tuscany, and then we drove down to Rome. Had a few days in Rome, back down to Naples, went to Pompeii, then spent the remainder on the Amalfi Coast. So once you get the skeleton of your itinerary, I actually write this out in Microsoft Word. And so it'll be day 1, day 2, Venice. And then utilizing things like Google Explore, I build an itinerary. I read a ton of different blogs, and I figure out what the best things are to do. I talk to people on my podcast all the time. But the big thing that I think people miss is, they'll say they're going to Venice, and they might know the main tourist attractions and nothing more. And so they'll know that they have to go to Doge's Palace and St. Mark's Basilica and things like that. But then beyond that, they really don't know what else there is to do, and maybe they'll just assume they'll wing it. Things, though, to look out for as you're planning the trip and you're looking at Venice on a map, which I highly recommend Google Maps, is that it's all color-coded. And so as you're looking down on the city, things are color-coded in correspondence with what they're zoned as. So residential is zoned as a gray. Commercial is zoned as orange, and parks and public spaces are colored as green. So if you're looking on a map and you see a cluster of orange in a small area on a map surrounded by gray, you can assume that that orange are where all the restaurants are, surrounded by residences. So you can scroll into the orange area and then get an idea of which restaurants you want to visit, in correspondence with, the location of your hotel or Airbnb. So I always, when I'm looking for a hotel, I go to Google Maps first, and I'll zone in on a certain area, a certain orange area on the map, an area that I want to visit, and then I find a hotel in that location, because that's the area I'm going to spend the most time in, if that makes sense. So,
Yeah.
and then you can branch out from there.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I didn't realize that Google did that, which seems kind of silly not to know that, but what a cool feature that they have. I feel like they're just like making it easier and easier for travelers to plan trips.
I didn't realize it until just now, but I feel like I'm giving a commercial for Google. I'm not being paid.
They're this is not sponsored by Google, but no. Google, if you want to sponsor us.
Exactly. No, they really did. They make it so easy. I mean, the Google Flights, the Google Explorer, and the Google Maps are huge tools in my travel planning process. And the color coding is pretty important to use, because you need to be on the map layer. But if you're on the map layer, you can easily identify where things are immediately. It's, once you scroll out to a certain point and you know that there's an orange area, that's really all you have to pay attention to if you're looking for a restaurant. I mean, I'm sure there's anomalies, but that's just the general gist of it. Mm-hmm. So once I use that to find my hotel, I'll then use the map to figure out which restaurants are in close proximity to my hotel, and then parks. And you kind of plan it in a linear fashion where you can say, okay, my hotel's here. If I want to get breakfast, let me find a place to the east, because I'm heading east to go to this landmark anyway. And so you plan these out so that they're seamless, and you wake up and you walk in one single direction. You hit the restaurant, you continue on your way, you hit the park or you hit the landmark, and maybe you continue on your way and you go directly to the train station that's closest to where you already are going to be. And you get on the train and you move on, instead of, taking out your phone and doing it right there on the spot. Another thing too, if you do go this route and you do rely on Google Maps, you can download all of the maps of each city offline. So you can use them without service, which is a huge help, to be able to just take it out and walk the city and can see your location in real time on a downloaded map without any service at all.
Yeah, and so you figured out an area. Is there any kind of further steps between there and like what kind of happens between there and actually like getting on the flight in terms of planning?
Well, so I break it down day by day. So once I have the skeleton figured out, and for example, Italy's a good one because everybody seems to have gone there. So, my skeleton is Venice, Florence, Tuscany, Rome, Pompeii, Naples, Amalfi Coast. Then you figure out how many days do you want to spend in each area, and then you start breaking it down day by day. You figure out the location that you want to stay, or you figure out the landmarks that you want to see. And then you find a hotel in that general location. I don't know if this would always be the greatest way to go about things for maybe a budget traveler, because these hotels near the destinations or near the landmarks you want to see tend to be a bit more expensive. But if you're able to book those places, it will make it much easier to just wake up and already be in the location that you want to see most of these things, and then navigate your way through there.
Yeah, that's an important consideration too. I mean, we did like our last Europe trip together. We've both been to Europe separately since then, but together we were like very much on a budget. And I remember actually Italy's a great example, being in Rome. We were there in August, which is kind of like the off season for Italy because it's so hot. I think all the people who live in Rome like go to the coast and stuff like that. So it was really dead. There was lots of stuff closed. We ended up staying in a hostel that was really affordable, but it was quite far out from all the things we wanted to see. And we spent so much time walking and on the train and stuff like that.
But we did find in general in Europe, like The backpacker hostel travel is so well developed that you can usually find those places in good locations, or at least like maybe not like prime locations. Like it's not like on Las Ramblas in Barcelona, but near other attractions. There's a backpacker hostel, where you can, maybe you have to stay in a room with like 12 people or 16 people, but you can find something. One other curious fact about that hostel in Rome was actually it was a Minnesota themed hostel. And so almost everything was Vikings themed. And it was just randomly in the suburbs. I think it was Italian people who just like had lived in Minnesota for a while and like loved Minnesota.
It's called like Twin Cities Hostel or something like that. This was like 9 years ago. I don't even know if this hostel still exists, but it was great for like our purposes and stuff. But yeah, Ryan makes a good point. There are normally a couple of really good backpacker hostels that are right in the city center, but you do have to plan. Again, like this is the situation we had in Edinburgh. We booked last minute for a weekend. There was an event we didn't know about, and we couldn't get any of the good ones that were right in the center of Edinburgh. So, for us being on a budget at that point, it didn't really feel like an option to book, the closest hotel. So instead we would like take the time to walk every single day. So I think it's important to like know your budget and then know where you want to stay, because if you only have 3 days in a place and you have to walk an hour to get into town, I mean, that's going to take up a lot of your time. At some point you need to juggle.
Yeah. Do you want to shell out a little bit more money, or do you want to spend the time traveling more? That's like a constant back and forth is, are we willing to spend the additional money to limit the amount of, or to expand the amount of time that we have at a destination? Yeah. I should say I've never actually done I've never backpacked. I've never done any sort of budget travel. I really didn't get into traveling the way I do until maybe a little later in life, and I've had a career. And so the way I travel now is I go on vacations. That's all I can do. I have this career that supplies me the money to be able to go. And so a lot of my itineraries, I'm fortunate enough to not have to stray too far from the destinations. And I think that makes planning, obviously it makes it easier to do. But yeah, like you guys said, there has to be budget-friendly options in these areas.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one of the cool things about Airbnb that we found is, in some ways, like hostels get kind of centralized in that, like they'll be, or not hostels, but hostels are a bit more varied. But especially hotels are in the tourist areas, or maybe like there's business hotels in business areas. But with stuff like Airbnb, you can find Airbnb kind of all across the city. So if you go and you're like, hey, there's like these specific things I'm really excited about seeing, you can usually find places to stay close to them. And so one kind of follow-up thing, something I think everyone who's traveled quite a bit has learned, is that sometimes you hear about something cool, or you read about a cool attraction and you show up and you're like, wow, that's not what I expected. How do you go about kind of deciding on the landmarks, the sites, the places you want to see, and kind of maybe deciding if like, oh, is this going to be good or not? How do you vet them?
Well, so this is sort of where my wife and I differ in this travel planning process. So are you familiar with Google Street View?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So you can use Google Street View for anything. You can use it for finding a little side tangent, finding an Airbnb, or finding a hostel, or finding a car rental facility. If you Google the address and you drop the Google Street View guide right in front of the building, you can view the facade. You can view the front of the building on the computer screen. And so when you're there and you're trying to figure out, what does my Airbnb look like? What does this look like? You already did the planning and you already know what you're building. You already know what your front door looked like. And it makes it so much easier to say, there it is. That's the building. And you walk right in and you figure it out. So using Google Maps or Google Street View, I also view a lot of the landmarks that I'm going to see. And so I'll see most of these locations on a computer screen and get a feel for whether or not they're worth it, or what they look like from a person standing in front of them and taking a picture. Now, it doesn't ruin it for me. I love the contrast of seeing on a computer screen as I'm working tirelessly to plan this trip out, and then it coming to fruition when I'm actually standing in front of it. It doesn't bother me. Now, my wife doesn't like it. My wife wants to see it for the very first time in person, and she does not want to see it on a computer screen. But I think that helps a ton in me making sure that the landmark that I'm going to see is what it is. Because when you drop that little guy down in front of the Colosseum or in front of, I don't know, Machu Picchu, any destination you could think of, there are always other people in the photograph. It's never the Instagram picture of the Colosseum. It is a real person standing on the ground in the street with cars parked and people in front of him. And that's as raw, that's as real as a travel picture that you'll ever get. And I don't know, it gives me confidence that I know what I'm going to. So when I get there, I already know what it looks like on the ground in real time. And maybe that takes it back. I don't go there with the Instagram picture in my mind. I go there with the Google Street View picture in my mind.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think having expectations is really important, and like tapering expectations is also good. So I like that idea. I mean, so many things now you've seen photos of anyways. So being able to compare like what you're seeing on social media or what you're seeing in your guidebook to like what it actually looks like, I think that's a great idea, because especially if you only have a little bit of time, it's different if you're like, living somewhere and you have lots of time and you're like, oh, okay, well, this wasn't that great, but that's okay. We can see something else next weekend, versus being like, man, we wasted like a whole day on this thing. Like, that's a bummer.
Yeah. And there are things that I have cut out because of that. I can't think of them off the top of my head, but we always have to make that decision. Like, do we head east or do we head west? And at the end of the day, we'll pick one or the other based on our research and whether or not it seemed to be worth it. When we were in Europe, we decided against seeing this at Stonehenge, which I still to this day want to see one day. But based on our itinerary, it was just kind of out of the way. When you drop the little Google guide down there, although historically fascinating, I don't think it was, visually there's not a whole lot. I'm a big archaeology guy on archaeological sites. Don't get me wrong, but it just didn't fit. So, I think using that judgment and being able to actually put the guy in real time gives you a real raw understanding of what these destinations look like. I don't know if you're familiar with, there's a hike in Arizona, and then I just drew a blank on it. It's called like Camel. Oh man, a beautiful gorge that you can walk through.
Is it Antelope Canyon?
Yes. So the pictures, when you think of Antelope Canyon, what do you think of? The light shining through and the layered stone. Drop the Google guy in there. There's like 100 people inside of there.
Yeah.
in Google. And so, because that's what you think of these people who are alone and walking through this canyon like you're going to be isolated. If you drop the Google guy in there, it's packed, shoulder to shoulder. So that does help.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, continue.
So one last thing, I guess, about navigating the city too, that I wanted to add is orienting yourself once you're there. I know a lot of people aren't big on direction as far as like north, south, east, and west, but it can be huge in helping you understand where you are in a city. And so Philadelphia, for example, has City Hall. And on top of City Hall is a statue of William Penn. Now, William Penn stands on the spire and he faces northeast. He's always facing northeast. So no matter where you are in the city, if you can look up and see William Penn, using wherever he's facing based on where you're standing, you can orient yourself on where you are in the city. And if you have some sort of understanding of how the city's laid out, you can it'll help you navigate and walk through. And you can do that almost anywhere, depending on, you just need to find a building that you can see or a landmark of some kind and orient yourself on a certain side and know whatever side it faces and figure it out that way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's a good idea.
One thing I wanted to ask about and kind of comment on was, I think a lot of people have this idea and maybe this reaction against planning a trip, because almost like a reaction against this maybe older style or certain style of travel where it's like, hey, we're on a cruise or we're on a tour bus, and I'm on this tour bus in Europe and we're going Paris. We stop like ding, 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 ding. We go hop back on the bus and we go to the next spot, and the next spot, and the next spot. Maybe that's a way that people have traveled one time and didn't like it, or people's parents traveled and they're like, I don't want to do that with my life. I'm going to be more free spirited. But it's something that we found when we've done trips where we've been on like longer tours or even shorter tours, is that you kind of like tune out. You're just like, oh, hey, I'm a bit of a, a sheep along the plan. Do you think that's something that's like, is that something that you found when you've done tours that you haven't had like the planning and the control of, or is that something that you feel like is really more about not having the agency? Like if you're not planning it, it's easier to feel that way.
Yeah, I guess so. I don't like being confined to someone else's tour. I don't. It's just I don't enjoy it. But then I'm confining myself to my my own tour. I'm confining myself to this tour anyway, but it's, and I know people don't think that's how you should travel, but and I agree with certain people to an extent, but just like a budget traveler is incapable of traveling for someone who's visiting, Michelin star restaurants and going on yacht rides. Me, as an American with limited vacation time, is incapable of traveling like a digital nomad. I'm just not. So this is really my only option to see the world. Um, so, and so I guess I don't feel confined. I like the idea of not having to think about it once I'm there a lot. I don't like to plan on the road. I don't like to wing things. I know what I like. I know the type of food I like. I know the interests I have, whether they are historical interest, archaeological interest, architectural interest. I know what I'm into. I know the type of places I want to go and the people I want to meet and the parks I want to hike in. And so why not go with the plan? Like why show up and figure it out on the road when I'm fully confident in knowing what I want to do in certain destinations.
Yeah. And I think so much too, like if you think of traveling as a whole experience from the like ideation process of like a year before thinking how cool would it be to go to this place, through the planning process and through the actual experience itself. Like I know for us, when we start planning a trip, that sometimes it can be a hassle if it's like complicated, but most of the time it's really enjoyable and just having that thing to look forward to. And so I find sometimes when we're doing more like freewheeling travel, you feel not necessarily numb, but a little bit less excited about things versus like, oh, hey, we're going to this place in 4 months and we're like reading about it. We're looking at photos, we're watching videos. And then when we're there, we're also like more invested in it because we've watched a couple of shows about it. We understand more of the history. It feels much more alive to us versus like showing up somewhere that we've kind of just gone to on a whim because we don't feel as much agency over it.
It's a great point. That's something that I've told friends in the past. Like, so in Croatia, in the city of Dubrovnik, I believe this is where it was. It might have been Split, but there's this gate that people drive through every day, and no one knows anything about it. There probably are tour guides that come and explain it to you, but I read about it online. I read the history of the gate and its significance of the stone sculptures and its placement. And so my wife and I was like, hey, look, there's this cool gate. And as we walked out, I told her about the history and we understood what it meant. And I mean, I'll admit when we got there, it was just this normal stone structure in the middle of a street that people drove through. But to know what it was and what it stood for and the history behind it is cool. And something that we obviously would have never known if we didn't put the time in to plan it out. And we do put in sometimes close to a year of planning. Every time, we'll sit on the couch and we'll crack a bottle of wine and we each take out our laptops and she'll handle reservations or, hotel accommodations. I'll handle some, restaurants, and we'll sit and we'll talk. And it's kind of like a night hanging out together on the couch and we'll plan our trip. And then to do that together and to bond over that, and then to get there together and experience it and already know the history of the locations that you're in, and how to navigate on your own without asking for directions is really helpful. I mean, I find it, I love it, but there are a ton of benefits to doing it this way. I think really the only reason I would not go about this way is if I wanted to or had the time. If I had 6 months to travel the world, I wouldn't do this at all. I would show up. I mean, I would show up and just enjoy my time there in a very leisurely manner. But we do, with the limited time, get incredibly excited about, hey, what do we have on our itinerary tomorrow? oh, we're doing this and we're going shark diving off the coast of Hawaii, and we already have everything scheduled and paid for. And so when we get there too, that's another point. Most of our tours and hotels and Airbnbs, everything's booked. We spend a majority of our money 6 months before we even go, which allows our bank accounts to recover by the time we actually leave for the destination for whatever it may be, food and alcohol and souvenirs, which add up. Pretty much everything is booked 6 months out, from the rental car to the hotel accommodations to the airfare, obviously. That helps a ton doing it that way for your funds. Financially, it helps a lot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I feel like all of this makes sense to me. And I think that like you're saying, so much of the enjoyment of travel is getting excited about it and putting pictures on a vision board, or changing the background of your computer to this thing you're going to see in a couple months, or, putting some photos on your fridge so you can get excited about that. Like that was something that really helped us save for our South America trip. And I think too, there's just some things, of course you can make travel mistakes like we've made and miss things that you wanted to see because you did bad planning, or you can not get the accommodation you want. But I think there's also just some things that in general you kind of do need to plan a little bit more. Like when we were in South America, I mean, we did a lot of it just kind of week by week. We would plan out where we wanted to go and how we were going to get there. But there were certain things like going to the Galapagos Islands, which was like a once in a lifetime experience, which we planned, and going to Carnival in Rio. And what else did we have planned? I felt like there was one other thing.
Running of the Bulls?
Oh, yeah, that was in Spain. But yeah, Running of the Bulls. Like there's certain things that happen at certain times and they're busy. And if you want to go do them, you need to book them in advance. Oh, Machu Picchu is the one I was going to say. Machu Picchu is, if you want to hike the Inca Trail, like you need to book that like a year in advance. And, we showed up in Cusco and wanted to do a trip, and they're like, yeah, of course you can't hike the Inca Trail. You can do some other cool stuff, which was amazing. We got to like mountain bike and zip line, and we still got to go up to Machu Picchu. But, if you want to do certain things, it's worth it to plan it in advance, I think.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And I do want to add that I always joke that I plan for spontaneity. I don't dismiss the idea of being somewhere and talking to a cab driver or talking to a waiter and finding out that theirs might be something better than you had planned, and make the call. If you think that, this local spot this taxi driver just told you about might be more fun than the whatever it is you had planned, go for it, because that can be fun in and of itself. I think it's good to have the itinerary, the blueprint to rely on, but ultimately, there's no issue with you winging it once you're there, or maybe stepping outside of that planned itinerary and juggling things around a bit. I think that can lead to a ton of different, great experiences.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, my parents were supposed to be coming down to see us in Panama before we came back to Canada and the pandemic hit. They were actually like en route to Panama when the WHO called a pandemic. So that was interesting. But, my parents travel quite a bit differently than Ryan and I normally do. And so with looking at how we were going to do that trip, we really wanted to make sure they felt comfortable and that they felt like their time spent on their vacation was very much worthwhile. And one of the things that we had done was we'd picked a couple top activities. We'd planned out the tours we wanted to do because, that's the type of thing that if you get delayed by weather or maybe it books out or something, like you might just not be able to do it because they only had, a week there. And then we left, I think it was one day. We had one activity per day. We had a couple restaurants that we wanted to go to. And then we had one day where they're like, let's just leave it totally free. So if we're tired, we can hang by the pool. If there's other stuff we want to go see, we can just, slot that in. And I really really enjoyed like planning and prepping that trip because it was a way that we hadn't, I guess, planned or prepped in quite a while because we've been doing this nomad thing for so long now. And I love the idea of like leaving some time for that spontaneity or to recover, or, if something goes wrong or there's something else you discover along the way, you can still have time for that.
Right. Yeah. And stagger them. You can have a very jam-packed Monday and then have an easy Tuesday. Even if it's just the only thing on your Tuesday is explore Venice, and you just enjoy walking around the city. And then Wednesday, you have a full itinerary again. I mean, you technically still planned to do nothing and explore Venice, but it's still an easy, leisurely day that opens the doors to unknown experiences.
Yeah,
definitely.
absolutely. Amazing. This conversation has been awesome. I feel like you've definitely convinced me that we need to do some more planning for our future travels, and also given like some tips and inspiration for how to actually do that, which I think is really helpful, because I think some people do want to do it, but maybe they're just like, I don't even know where to start. I'll hire a travel agent or I'll just wing it. So definitely appreciate those tips. If people want to learn more about you, listen to your podcast, all that good stuff, where can they go to find you?
The Traveler's Blueprint podcast. It's everywhere that podcasts are. Instagram, Facebook. We also have pages there where we share the pictures and the information on the guests that we have on. And that's really it. TravelersBlueprint.com. Travel podcast where we talk to just mainly adventures. We're having you on. We have you on next week, so we're excited for that. And
yeah, we can't wait.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Bob.
Yeah, thank you.
To find more information, relevant links, and photos talked about in this week's episode, check out theworldwanderers.com.
If you have a question, comment, or feedback, send us an email at info@theworldwanderers.com. Join our community on Facebook at The World Wanderers or on Twitter at World Wanderers 1. As always, thanks so much for listening.
Have a great day.
Bye.